Hey, what's up, Ben? Long time no see. How you been?
Hi, doing really good, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I really appreciate you talking with me today. I've known you for a long time, but I haven't seen you in a while. I know you've been in the spray foam insulation world for a long time as a contractor. We've worked together a lot here in the Metro Louisville area on projects. And then I think in the last few years, you've moved on to the industry rep side of things from the chemical manufacturer side of things. So I really value your expertise in the spray foam industry. Um, and I'm really excited to hear some of your thoughts on, some misconceptions that homeowners or just people in general have about spray foam. Some things that they may want to ask a spray foam contractor before they actually hire one. And then, we'll wrap it up with some like pros and cons of spray foam versus some other types of insulation products. So,
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit, about what you're doing right now, and if you can add any color to what I already set up for the audience there.
Yeah. So right now I am a manufacturer's territory representative for Creative Polymer Solutions. And so we make both AccuFoam, spray foam products, as well as rugged coatings, which will be our acrylic, and then also polyurea products. So our specialty coatings and protective coatings there.
Okay. So would those go on top of the spray foam, or there's just completely different application?
There are so many different applications to that. So yes, they can all go on top of spray foam, which is fantastic. Typically that's commercial applications, roofing applications, or
Okay.
industrial. And then polyurea is in the family of polyurethane products, but totally separate from spray foam. And that would be like wastewater contamination systems, municipality sewer systems, just
Okay.
some pretty fun stuff.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I don't know anything about that stuff, so we're going to focus on spray foam insulation for today.
Yeah.
Um, so, given the fact that you have this kind of unique angle of having been a contractor, actually sprayed foam, sold it for a long time, and now you're with the manufacturer side of things, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions out there that homeowners and people just in general have about spray foam insulation. And if you've got some of your like top three or four, topics that you can address to that issue, I want to kind of hear your thoughts on what those misconceptions are and what the reality is behind them.
Yeah. I think the biggest misconception right now is what's happening overseas.
Over in England and
Specifically,
Europe.
that's right. Yeah. I'm getting
Yeah.
phone calls about that all the time. I mean, it seems like every other day I'm on the phone with a contractor who's on the phone with their builder, building inspector. I mean,
Yeah.
we've even gone as far to talking to the insurance agencies to like, hey, is there truth to what's going on here? Are we seeing anything? And
Yeah.
then our trade association, the SPFA, is actually addressing that on a national level and international level as well.
And before we get too far, just so people that don't know what we're talking about, can you kind of lay the land of what we're going to explain here?
Yeah. So in the United Kingdom, what's happening right now is they have a lot of houses that were sprayed, from everything that we can see is sprayed with open cell spray foam. So a vapor permeable and water permeable insulation to
Mm.
the underside of the roof deck. And mortgage companies are refusing to either refinance, they're not passing that inspection. Um, from
And that's pretty
everything,
serious.
yes,
It's,
it is.
it's
And
huge.
so it's this big boogeyman that has just traveled like wildfire across the country. And I would say even across the globe. I'm seeing it on random comments online. Well, these countries in Europe are disallowing it. And so a
It's going to
little
be
bit out,
banned here eventually or something.
yeah, that's the threat. So everybody's saying this, but I would still qualify it as an absolute misconception at the moment, because if you follow the building science like you've laid out, a lot of this starts to make more sense. The United
Yeah.
Kingdom does not use central heating and air the same way that the United States does. So that's
Okay.
a huge issue when it comes to moisture management. Okay. So, like you and I have gone on in our past, is it an issue with the spray foam or is it an issue with the environment? Is it
Or the
both?
occupants.
Correct. You and I have both seen houses built the exact same way, insulated the exact same way, yet the occupants are living in it differently, whether that's just more people or, like we've had, I can
The
think of one
behavior.
going back 15 years ago. Yeah, they were boiling water all day long.
Yeah.
Of course, the environment is going to be much harder to manage at that point.
Yeah.
And that's really where this is coming down to is, the spray foam is doing what it needs to do. Was it the right product of spray foam? That argument is fair to say. So like there's a shred of truth in this that should it have been closed cell, which is a vapor barrier and water, barrier. Yes. But then what would have happened anyway? That moisture is going to still be in that.
You still have to dehumidify the moisture or remove it somehow or another, right? So
That's exactly right.
So that's really the crux of the issue that we're hearing about is houses that were spray foamed that didn't have central AC or some kind of dehumidification method or a lack of ventilation to remove the moisture. And now that, so is it because the environment that this is occurring in, is it a humid environment, I would assume, as well? Like kind of the Kentucky climate zone 4, climate zone 3, is it similar to that or is it more than that?
I don't know enough about England and Scotland and their weather patterns to really say about that. I would assume from a little bit of travel there, and then their consistency through the Gulf Stream and everything, it would be something more like Southern Illinois, also Southwest Michigan, where you're cool and humid, so you're very close to the dew point, right? Because Kentucky, we don't have that problem nearly as much. As the temperature rises, the humidity tends to level out, except in our bridge months. But in West Michigan and Central Michigan, that dew point and the temperature are rising together. So you're still going to maintain that. I'm sorry, I said that. The humidity and temperature are rising together. So the dew point is still very close. And as we know, like when you're hitting that dew point, you're getting condensation.
Yeah.
And that's one of the downfalls in certain circumstances of open cell spray foam.
So the issues that are happening in Europe are mainly because of the housing stock that they have and their relative lack of awareness of air conditioning and dehumidification in that housing stock.
Lonely me and former contractor, that is what I would look at, and so now it's an issue of who's in charge of disproving this misinformation or confirming the shreds of evidence there. And then even after that, it's what's going to be done about this, because this is something we all have to factor in and live with. So it's really bringing the building science topic to light. And that's how all the contractors I've been dealing with across my territory have been approaching it. You acknowledge the fact that, yes, this is a possibility, just like you and I have done in the past. Acknowledge the fact that, yes, if this isn't taken care of correctly on the planning stage, it can be a problem.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a huge one right now. What would be another kind of misconception about spray foam that you hear a lot?
It has formaldehyde, it's poisonous, it's all this and that.
Toxic, whatever.
Yep, that it doesn't belong in buildings. So there's a lot there, that has transpired since spray foam's first inception back, post World War II. Through the 70s, we were dealing with exterior applications and mainly commercial roofing. There was, these materials that weren't suited for, living space and interior space. And so that's where all the advancements in the spray foam industry have really gone in the last few years. And even when you and I were working together about 6 years ago, there's this topic of the changing blowing agents in closed cell spray foam.
Okay.
So it's getting healthier and healthier as far as that part goes. And then acknowledging the fact in the planning stage of how are you ventilating these buildings while you have that initial off gas,
Right.
so a cured spray foam is chemically inert. That's been proven and certified as like a Green Guard Gold product, but you still have to deal with the installation side.
And so when you say cured, what does that mean?
So, fundamentals of spray foam, it's a 2-part mix, and you are custom making it to the, space you're installing it. So that's a huge benefit of spray foam, is that it can be this amazing problem solver. But we do have to acknowledge we are mixing 2 chemicals. And so we
On
have to,
site at the person's house or building or whatever.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. So we have to plan for that ventilation, typically cured out from a liquid, expanded through that process, that initial puff of steam and has come off of it. And we have to get that little bit of residue and byproduct in that gas out of there. Okay. So there are very specific ventilation procedures by the American Chemistry Council. And then the additional step that you can go, like my company has gone through, is to prove and do the ASTM testing, which is national standard testing, to say, hey, with this many air changes through your workspace, you are approved for re-entry, not only re-entry, but re-occupancy within this many hours. Okay. So that's where you and I can get into that nitty gritty of it is 10 air changes per hour. You are approved for 1 hour re-occupancy, which makes it really nice.
But for homeowners who have no idea what air changes per hour are, if they're getting spray foam work done to their house, basically it needs to be ventilated while the process is happening.
Correct.
So there's some kind of usually what I see is like a big fan that has a tube that's connected to the fan, and it's running into the space where it's actually being sprayed, and then it's going out of the house. It's pulling it directly out of the house, just like it's a makeshift exhaust fan is basically what it is, but industrial strength kind of.
And it goes 2 ways. You want to supply a little bit of air into the workspace, at one side, and then ventilate it out, exhaust that air from the other side. So you get a draw of air across your workspace, and that's how you get that air change. You don't want to be reliant, if we're talking about, per se, a sealed room that has 2 doors on the opposite ends. You don't want to just put that exhaust fan at that one door, because it's going to draw air in through that door. You want to open the other door and have a fan bringing in air on that far side. And that's the proper way to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, this is good information for sure, because a lot of people probably are not aware that this needs to happen, when they're talking to a spray foam company. And so this is definitely one of the things that they should ask, is this part of your standard practice when you're installing foam, and how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, when you go to choose a contractor, that would be one of the most important things I would want to know. As being in the spray foam industry, I don't own the equipment. I'm not going to go and do it, but I'm going to hire somebody to do it. And so I'm trusting them with my house, my livelihood, my family, where they sleep, my daughter, things like that. I want to know, hey, what is your plan for this? And then what do I need to do personally? Because I know guys who can spray foam and they dial it in, they make sure it's very safe. But sometimes they just don't own the equipment, or they don't do existing homes. They only do new construction.
And they're not worried about the occupants coming back into the house a few hours later.
I mean, nobody's living in it at that point. So it's not that it's necessarily a disservice from that company, but it's some adjustment. If they are into retrofit work, they should own that equipment. They should own fans to ventilate the workspace, and they should have a written plan with their crews of how to do it.
Yeah. So another one that I'm thinking of on this kind of same line is these, do-it-yourself froth pack kits. And even now we're seeing these, spray foam in a can with a gun I'm seeing it all over Facebook and Instagram. Look, you can just buy, 2 cases of this canned foam stuff and you can spray your own, and it's crap, frankly. I've done it myself, not with the cans, but with the froth pack. And my personal experience with it is it does not expand nearly as well. You don't get anywhere close to the yield that they say that you're going to get. And it's frankly not really cheap, right? So, I'm sure you got some thoughts on that topic there.
I've got lots of thoughts on it and a lot of perspective change over the course of my career. So even up till yesterday, I was teaching a continuing education credits for, 14 architects. And so you have to address all the delivery methods of polyurethane foam. So one of the big things, I'll go from the smallest to largest. Can foam. It's a single component polyurethane foam product that's classified as a sealant.
Okay. So it's not really made for a comparable closed cell, open cell product, right?
That's right. And so it cures, in its curing process, it needs air, to go through that curing process. Unlike, ours was a plural component, it's creating that chemical reaction. So single component can foams, for the sake of building science, would be fantastic if for like a homeowner DIY who wants to go and seal their rim joist, right? Now you can see, okay, that little spray tip they have, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We've done remodeling projects together where they have the old shiplap siding when you take apart the wall, and it's got all the gaps. If you really wanted to do that yourself, that would be a perfect use of that fan tip on a can foam pistol.
So, but because I've done that myself as well, would that type of fan tip actually be better than just a regular foam gun? I mean, does it fill the gap any better?
Questionable. It would be more so for the Energy Star building process, using traditional insulation. Well, how do you seal every one of these frames or the butt joints of the plywood, to just put a good
seating to the wall studs and, drywall top plates and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you have to acknowledge, these products are out there and they have their place. One of the things that makes them very frustrating is the tiny print on the back of the instructions
that you can't read.
That's right. And in that tiny print, it's going to say mix, some of them I've seen even mix continuously for 10 minutes. Who can sit there and shake can foam for 10 minutes vigorously and then continue to do that? Now, so that's can foam. When we're talking about froth packs, we're talking about the low pressure, typically like propane size canisters, right? So you have 2 of those. A real key to them, again, on those instructions, is to get them up to temperature. You're supposed to get those to 80, 85 degrees.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
How often does that happen? I mean, you'd have to have an electric blanket or something wrapped around these things for an hour or 2 or more, right?
Correct. So for energy, improvement professionals, handymen, things like that, that is one of the considerations. They do sell specifically small electric blankets to go around those little propane tanks. And that tends to
temporary use for that 1-2 times that you're going to use it, right?
Correct. But if you go, I know a couple builders just in Louisville that they will do their more affordable houses. They're not just cookie cutter slap together, things like that. They're paying a little more attention. They'll go and do, behind the showers, behind the kitchen sink.
With the froth packs.
With the froth packs. That's right. Okay. And so that's a perfect example of where they are applicable, and where you
see that.
Right? We're talking, 100 square feet, 150 square feet.
And these are 200 board foot to 600 board foot kits typically, right?
Yeah, they do come bigger than that, but that would be for something like hot tub manufacturers or, these insulated bins and things like that.
Yeah.
So they do come in bigger kits, but really, as far as the general public's concerned, they're being sold through Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards as,
Amazon.
yeah, as DIY kits.
Yeah.
They still have an expiration date and they have to get up to that temperature.
Yeah.
So if you're
And
able to do it, sure, but then you're still mixing two chemicals. So that's
yeah,
another thing that people don't consider. And
you're
if
able
you
to do
don't,
it right.
right, that's right. You got to be able to do it right. And so that's those two systems I would say there. Do they have their place? Yep, they sure do. Are they more complex than hiring a professional? Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, depending on the project that you're looking at, if you're trying to seal all your rim joists and maybe even insulate your foundation walls, I mean, that's a lot of square footage to cover in most average size houses. And so by the time you buy 2 or 3 of those kits, you probably could just pay a spray foam contractor to come out and do it professionally and get better results, is my experience, what I've seen.
That's exactly right. I mean, you got to understand what the products, their primary design is for, and then fit the product to the project, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things, like as a contractor, I would always say to homeowners is like, what is your time worth?
Yeah.
In the, 40 hours that this is going to take you to DIY it, I could come in there and be finished in 4 hours.
Right.
So what are your 40 hours worth with your family, your hobbies, or even, distill it all the way down to the nitty gritty? Like, what do you personally and professionally make per hour in your job?
Right. And the side effects, the potential negative side effects of doing it incorrectly and breathing in stuff that you don't want, or you do it and it doesn't expand, it doesn't perform, and now you're stuck. You've already spent however many hundreds or thousands of dollars on this product, and it still didn't solve the problem that you had in the first place.
That's exactly right. And I think everybody who's used the low expansion sealant can foam from a box store will say, yeah, I went so far and then I took a break and now the straw is all,
Gunked
clogged up and it's
Yeah.
totally gone. So, you almost have to factor a 10 to 20% loss of efficiency on that, not only the learning curve, but just how the product gets delivered.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because they want to take lunch and they don't realize that they got to cap it off and turn off the nozzles and everything. They come back from lunch and then nothing's coming out. They're like, oh my God, I just spent $600 on these stupid tanks. So this is a good one.
Professional contractors, even, we deal with it all the time with that sealant can foam, because it is a perfect product for sealing doors and windows, newly installed or retrofit install, or just doing around some can lights that are already airtight. It's a great product for that. Yes. But again, even as a contractor, you let that can sit on that application pistol too long and it's totally junk.
Now you're on the cheap end, $20 or $30 gun is gone and you got to get another one.
Well, that's at the industry professionals level, right? Like you and I could have been able to do that. You go to Home Depot, those application ones that are Lowe's or Menards, they're $50.
Yeah.
Like that's not cheap.
Right. Especially if you thought you were saving money by doing it.
Yeah. So we see that a lot where it's not saving really any money in a larger project, but it's costing a lot more time.
Yeah.
And
probably headaches and, inferior quality at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So we've covered some major misconceptions. Are there any other ones that you want to cover?
There are so many misconceptions. You could touch on one of the more complex one is that, well, I can get the same performance out of a different product, out of, say, a fibrous product. So whether that be batten insulations, blown in loose fill insulations, fiberglass or cellulose or rockwool, take your pick. We do have to remember when you're comparing those, the industry was designed initially to compare just on R value, right? Well, that's only one mode of heat transfer. And so I remember learning, the 3 modes of heat transfer back in middle school and high school. So I don't mean to be condescending on this, but we have to remember it transfers in 3 ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conduction, convection, and radiation.
That's right. So does your insulation account for all 3? Or does it just account for 1? Does it account for 2 of them? The more, the better. And really what that means is, the more modes of heat transfer that you can take care of, the less overall product you need. And so the building codes are finally catching up to that. We'll probably see that in the next 6 years, that it's nationally adopted across the board to acknowledge that fact.
Okay. All right. So, I know one of the biggest, the 2 biggest applications I see for homeowners on, when they want to hire a spray foam contractor, and generally what I recommend, depending on the situation, are, spray foaming crawl spaces that are currently ventilated and changing those into sealed and conditioned crawl spaces. And then basically the same kind of application in the attic. And again, it's going to ruin your shingles if you spray foam the roof deck. It's going to void the warranty. You're going to create a humidity mess. And this goes back to preparation, what we talked about earlier, making sure that you have the correct kind of ventilation. Your exhaust fans from bathrooms and from kitchens and stuff are actually vented out of the attic properly. The vent lines aren't snaked and going all over the place and then eventually going out of the house, 50 feet down the line. But I still get this question a lot, will spray foaming my roof deck void my manufacturer's warranty for the shingles? And I'm sure you get it a lot too. So could you address that real quick?
Not so much as I used to. And that's because Owens Corning has, I believe the second time in their history, gotten into the spray foam, the larger spray foam game. They purchased a national company that manufactures that high pressure spray foam. So as far as what I've been able to hear, they still are maintaining, kind of neutral ground on that of will it rot, or burn the shingles. Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, this is, where's that information coming from and what has been done in the industry to disprove or prove it, right? Because a lot of these spaces, like the studies down in Texas and Florida, did the study comparing a spray foamed roof deck and a ventilated roof deck to come find out there was, the maximum difference in shingle temperature was 6 degrees. So it
doesn't seem like it's enough to burn shingles out,
Right. Yeah. So then, if you're worried about that, you'd be better off changing your shingle color and you'll get a bigger benefit than 6 degrees.
Going to a lighter colored shingle.
Going to a lighter color shingle. Yep.
Yes.
But I'm getting this in the northern Midwest, and getting that question in Michigan. I was like, you rarely see 100 degrees at all compared to Florida and Texas, where there are bright, sunshiny days at 100 degrees plus.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. That it comes down to the planning and execution is really the biggest thing. The more questions you ask, or simply, if you're choosing between contractors, ask them, what is your standard operating procedure for a house like mine? I would like to understand. Yeah. And I love that question, as a contractor, because it really let us exhibit the fact that we do care. Spray foam.
They can better compare, apples to apples on their estimates, right?
Yeah. So when we're comparing apples to apples, it's important to understand the planning that goes behind a contractor's quote. And so asking those questions to gain a better understanding and then making sure that they're doing it. I think that's fair of everybody, because we mainly talk as contractors in layman's terms. and simplify it so you can distill on a simplistic level of what's required and what we're going to do, the plan of action, and keep it from being confusing. But the wonderful thing that we've seen over, the 15 years that I've been involved is the education level on the subject has gone up and up and up.
Right.
Yeah. So when
trying to do here as well. So
yeah. So when we start talking, what is your ventilation plan? If a homeowner asks me that, first thing I would say is thank you for asking that question. Like, that's a really important difference that my company does. And I will just speak about what we do. And then if you're comfortable, I would love to proceed, So that's a big piece of it. And I think any, person coming out to give an estimate really needs to be able to articulate what their company is actually going to do.
Right. And the last one I kind of want to address from a homeowner's perspective is, again, comparing two different estimates or options, whether they're going to blow the attic with fiberglass or cellulose and maybe seal the lid versus conditioning the attic with spray foam on the roof deck. If they go the roof deck option and they want to condition the attic, I'm still seeing bids that don't include removing the existing insulation from the attic. And all they'll do is kind of rake it in from the edge of the soffits. Sometimes they don't even rake in the fiberglass or the cellulose. And then what happens is they'll spray foam the roof deck. It comes down. Here's your outside wall. Here's your roof deck. And they don't seal the most important gap because they're spraying foam onto the existing insulation. So I always tell customers, my clients that ask, you need to remove the insulation from the attic, A, for an indoor air quality benefit, but B, so that the new insulation works as it's intended. And I would argue the same is true for conditioned crawl spaces, maybe to a lesser degree, but could you kind of explain why that's really important?
I always like the approach of that indoor air quality thing, because like exactly what we're doing here is that knowledge gap of what is a good spray foam job. What does a complete install look like? What does a completely sealed thermal envelope look like without going through with either a blower door or thermal camera? What does that look like? So it is the standard operating procedures. And like I said, our trade association, the SPFA, has written documentation on this. Again, I like to distill it down to the easiest thing. That fiberglass or cellulose or whatever is up in your attic has been there for how many years?
Decades.
Exposed to the elements, allergens, pests, and animals.
Yes.
So one of the biggest reasons to get that out of there is when we come in and spray foam the roof deck, whatever is in that insulation is now part of your living space.
Right.
So if you wouldn't have it on your pillow, let's get rid of it.
Yeah. Because all those leaks that were happening between the inside of the house and the attic before, whereas you may not have noticed them as much, you're definitely going to notice them more after you seal the roof deck and they're connected, right?
Yes.
So What about the crawl space? Is it really important to remove like fiberglass that's in a floor system of a crawl space, a ventilated crawl space before you spray foam it or after, I guess, or does it really matter as much?
It gets a lot more complex. So there's an argument to be made, and we see it a lot in like the Louisville, Kentucky housing stock. We got a lot of shotgun houses, right?
Mm-hmm.
24 feet wide at the most, so you can make the argument that, hey, I need to keep that insulation there because I'm getting radiant cold coming up from this dirt. Like, yeah, I mean, that absolutely is a true statement. You and I have seen it. But at the same time, so I'll go over pros and cons real quick here. In one aspect, we want to remove that because that's the best thing to do is get rid of all the old nasty stuff. The other part of getting rid of that is to make sure that that initial puff of steam and off-gassing of the spray foam has no place to cling to. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not
necessarily about that part.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. I don't like to, play the boogeyman and scare people, but that is absolutely part of the equation.
Okay.
The best way I have seen it done is to use a vapor barrier and insulation barrier over the dirt while removing the fibrous insulation.
So that comes
So
out like it's a temporary vapor barrier when the fiberglass is pulled out, then you pull the vapor barrier out as well, or you just leave that.
you absolutely could leave the old nasty vapor barrier, might
Mhm.
have some punctures in it. You're sealing that out from your living space. So I think the best thing people can do is understand, where is the barrier between my living space and the outside, right? So if something's under that vapor barrier, a new vapor barrier installed, it is outside your living space. But I'm
Okay.
more specifically talking about vapor barriers. Like, there's a company called Viper.
Right.
They make a really nice crawl space vapor barrier. It is the toughest stuff I've seen in a long time.
Yep.
What most people don't know is they also make that vapor barrier that's got the equivalent of like an R10 insulation on the underside of it.
Oh, really? Viper
Yeah.
does?
Yes, they do.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
I know. And so you go through and think about, bay windows or bump out additions where they've got, essentially 5 sides of exposure. We do have to be concerned of that radiant cold sucking up through the floor. And so you have
You
to
got my
plan for
wheels
that.
turning now. Like I'm like, so how thick is this Viper vapor barrier that has the R10 in it?
Not
That's what
terribly
made
thick, but
really.
just like when we're doing an attic roof line with spray foam, you're establishing that buffer of air that's also going to act as an insulator.
Yeah.
Okay.
But either way, so like if you're foaming a crawl space, even if you have an existing vapor barrier down there, it's probably old, it's probably deteriorated. Guarantee it doesn't cover the entire floor. It's not taped together. So as a matter of standard practice, I think it's recommended that you put in a new vapor barrier, 6 mil at the very minimum, and preferably one of these reinforced Viper vapor barriers that are stronger. They got the woven material to keep it from, break-in and
Yep.
animals and stuff chewing through it and stuff like that,
And
right?
and those newer vapor barriers are proven not to have any of the deterioration that we see out of like construction plastic.
Because they're
Maybe
not
they're
recycled, right?
correct. And this is the one case where a non-recycled product is a very good thing.
Because it
So,
lasts longer.
right. And it lasts longer, but we've also had the phone calls for the indoor air quality. Of course, spray foam makes such a big difference in an environment. Everything's more noticeable.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've had the calls where, hey, we need you to come out and test the air. We think the spray foam you installed is bad. Well, I have it documented. My guys followed all the manufacturer's procedures, did our testing, everything to the case. I would be happy to come out and check this out. We even went as far to have a indoor air quality expert with their lab. Typically, these people are doing asbestos remediation, come in and take samples of the air and test for the chemicals that are in spray foam. Found out that it was the vapor barrier that was breaking down and giving off like a urine smell or urea smell.
Really? Is this a new vapor barrier or the existing one that they sprayed against?
This was the old vapor barrier that they sprayed against.
So
Yeah.
the heat and the chemicals from the new spray foam on the old vapor barrier was causing some kind of a chemical reaction in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so
Interesting.
that's just acknowledging, that can happen with new vapor barriers when you're just buying construction plastic from the big box stores. They are recycled products. So that's why, there are a number of companies that produce this, but and they call it a virgin like polyethylene or, polystyrene products are what you're going to want in that case.
Okay. Well, this has been great information. I'm sure most homeowners and most people in general have not thought about these things. And it's going to be super helpful for people to understand just questions to ask their contractor, some of these pros and cons that we've talked about. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with today?
This whole subject of building science is continuously evolving. You and I have seen that, and that would kind of be like a closing statement is, I will never want to rule something out. we've had industry professionals change their opinion on very big and important things.
Yeah.
That, we're kind of in the glory days of building science, where stuff we were proposing 15, 20 years ago, we've now had enough time to see how those decisions were affected in the building industry. So
Yeah.
we're learning more about, hey, ventilating attics. I think the big specific one, we now have builders who will think about the living space, but what about the attic that's 20 feet tall and the humidity that can occur up there? Like, it's a totally
Right.
different climate.
Right.
So staying up to date with information is very important. I encourage all the contractors I deal with is they can have customers reach out directly to me and we can discuss this further.
Yes.
So having that knowledge involvement is a huge deal.
And just the availability of the knowledge that's out there. I mean, there's podcasts now, there's YouTube, obviously, and, there's all these different resources that people have available that were not there 15, 20 years ago. So it's and the tools to be able to test this kind of stuff, not only with, the building enclosure side of things, but the HVAC side of things. They're really getting some really cool tools to test the performance of HVAC systems that we didn't have even just a few years ago. So
yeah, this is where you and I can stay really excited for a long time.
There's an endless supply of housing stock out there that has been messed up and is continuing to be built that's messed up. And so it unfortunately, until the big builders, I think, really move and not even, what I found with the big builders is like some of the regional builders or some of the regions that they build in will be done really well. And then in other regions, it's the same builder, but it's completely different building codes, completely different superintendents and subcontractors. And so the consistency lacks. And so hopefully with this education and the awareness by homeowners to demand these kind of answers and knowledge will push the industry forward to a more consistent, more healthy, comfortable, and efficient homes,
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, knowledge is power. And when you're spending your money, you have every right to ask these questions.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been super informative for me as well. And, I'm not a rookie to this industry, but I learned a few things today. So always appreciate your knowledge and expertise, Ben. And I will talk to you on another one here soon, hopefully.
I'll look forward to getting with you soon, Eric. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. I'll talk to you.
Bye-bye.